Good morning, all. It is a pleasure to be with you guys here today. Some of you guys may not know me. I am Nick Theyyunni. Again, as Sam said, I work at University of Michigan. But I feel that it's important in a leadership talk to talk through kind of who we are as human beings. And so in an effort to do that, asked my son, what should I include in a keynote presentation to a group that has a lot of pediatric emergency providers? And he said, definitely something about Halloween and something about dinosaurs. And so I feel the need to honor my littlest collaborator. And so here is my son, Alex. He's 6. In his Halloween costume. He's the Gruffalo. And it's important to understand pediatric literature, I feel like. And here is a Tyrannosaurus Rex in a fetching holiday sweater. I really do think that one of the takeaways of my talk is being a leader doesn't mean being kind of a soulless corporate shill. It means understanding how leadership as a competency is part of the fullness of who you are authentically as a human being. We are at P2. It is an ultrasound conference, although I recognize it's also a pediatric emergency medicine conference. And I want to make the case that the ultrasound training you guys have is as much about leadership training as it is about ultrasound. In fact, what I would like you to think is that the leadership training is kind of your hidden superpower within your ultrasound training. It can be really hard to engage with that kind of a persuasive argument in the abstract. And so I want you guys to think in terms of a concrete situation that all of us will be in at some point in our careers, some of us sooner than others. Let's think through this in terms of our interviews or our conversations with our bosses, often our chairs, when we discuss what our value is. And so as I go through this, I would love for you guys to, as a commitment exercise, imagine that you're interviewing for a job or explaining to your boss in an annual evaluation, what is it that you do? What is the value that you provide? What is your profession? I think for most of us, the intuitive answer is something like this. Knowing ultrasound and knowing ultrasound wizardry, that's the thing that we do. Uniquely, that's the thing that we do that no one else does, right? Every so often, a subspecialty cool ultrasound thing that saves lives and helps people. I really love ultrasound. I love lung ultrasound, and especially in pediatric patients, I love lung ultrasound for things like pneumonia. Dynamic air bronchograms, the finding in this clip, are one of my favorite findings. They are like emblematic of what is uniquely true of our subspecialty. We know a thing that we would love everyone to know, but often we are the only people that know. And by knowing this thing, we sometimes help the patient directly in front of us. Intuitively, this is our value, core subspecialty knowledge. But I think a conference like this is a good moment to reflect on whether the intuitive answer is really the correct or true answer. Asking what is it that you uniquely do. It's clearly valuable to look at what we do as a field, and what you seek to accomplish with our organizations like P2 is a good way to do that, because what we present, what we talk about here, is an expression of our values. So if you look at the P2 website or our agenda for today, there's a section on education, there's a section on research. On the website, there's a section on administration, and then of course today there's a special emphasis on global health. As I mentioned, I am the parent of a 6-year-old, and when I look at the work of your organization, when I look at the breakouts for today, I see the deft trick that they've pulled. They've hidden leadership broccoli in your ultrasound chicken nuggets. And as a sonologist, it is not just our job to know the ultrasound. It's not just our job to specialize on the subspecialty knowledge ourselves, but rather our job is to understand how to get the benefits of our subspecialty to every patient, be that locally, be that globally. And the things that you need to be successful as a sonologist are as much about making everyone around us better as it is about just understanding the ultrasound. And therein lies our superpower, because cracking the secrets to make everyone else better is one of the things that's at the core of great leadership anywhere. It's not just our superpower because it's our mission, though. It's also because we've trained for a very particular set of skills. And that set of skills that you guys are training for or have trained for, ultrasound expertise, you may intuitively think of this as our core. It becomes our window on the world. Unlike other leaders who often have to train in leadership across all possible domains, we get to train in a nice, safe sandbox. Ultrasound training is leadership training, but it's training in a sandbox that is centered around the subspecialty knowledge and expertise that we all know we are already passionate about. We get to learn leadership while focused on goals within the area that we know and love deeply. And you may say, that's not leadership, that's just being an ultrasound faculty member. But if you think through all the different stakeholders you work with over the course of a short period of time as an ultrasound director, the reality is that this is a microcosm of leadership and administration as a whole. In a way, it's a microcosm of medical directorship or of education leadership. You'll work with other specialties that have differing interests. You'll work with non-physicians who have an important stake in the healthcare system, like billers or coders or IT people or risk management. You'll work in all of the areas of medical directorship, but with a focus on point of care ultrasound. And by doing that, you'll become aware of other things like credentialing and privileging. You'll learn a little about compliance. You'll work with radiology and PACS. You may go through a machine purchasing cycle and learn to do procurement. And you'll learn via peer review and other QA and QI practices, often through the image review we do. Ultrasound directorship is basically mini medical directorship or administrative leadership training, working within the microcosm of the emergency department and the healthcare system as it faces what we do in point of care ultrasound. Which means that your job is often not just to know the ultrasound, but to understand the healthcare system to be effective at your job. At a prior conference, a wise sinologist, Risa Lewis, once said that 80% of us think of ourselves as educators, and 20% of us think of ourselves as researchers. And that may be true, but 100% of us end up as leaders. And so the choice before you isn't really lead or don't lead. It's put in a little bit of work to become a really good leader, or accept that you won't be as good as you could be in this really core part of your job. So as we return to the commitment exercise, you meet with your chair, you have the new job, you've talked to your chair about your vision for your term as a leader. What is the big picture of the things you want to do? What's the first step you want to take in how to do it? It's an incredibly intimidating question. And I think that one of the reasons it's intimidating is because we don't always articulate what it is we need to imagine being a good leader. And just like illness scripts or frameworks for differentials, it is helpful to have a mental model, a scaffold for how you want to approach leadership. And so today we're going to go through my briefest possible mental model for leadership with a few pearls that I hope gives everyone something useful to take away. So here's my smallest possible grand unified model for understanding leadership. It is by no means comprehensive, and it is at best a brief introduction. But I want you guys to understand that you should lead on purpose. I want you guys to understand that you should lead with purpose. And I want you guys to recognize that not everything you'll encounter has purpose, and we need to be able to be prepared for that. So what do we mean by lead on purpose? I'm sure that many of you have worked with a leader who accidentally fell into a leadership position. And that may be some of you. And so many people, when they don't plan on doing leadership with their career, end up doing jobs where they have to be leaders without ever having put thought into what it takes to be a good leader. Step one of leading on purpose is to recognize that leadership is just another competency to learn. It's not some talent bestowed upon us. It's not primarily some natural gift. It's another skill that we learn and we hone. Just like ultrasound, just like resuscitation, just like a procedural skill set, just like managing a conversation with a parent. There's nothing natural about being a leader. Maybe there's something natural, but mostly leadership is a competency that you gain. And so what do I mean by it's its own body of knowledge? I mean that you would never plan to become an expert at procedural chunks of our specialty without having references and educational resources you look at. Primary literature, things like FOMED podcasts, EMRAP, or some other way to test your knowledge like Roche Review. And so similarly, I want to give you guys some starting points on useful places and perspectives to begin to learn the primary body of knowledge that is leadership. I'm going to try and keep this to be a mix of recommendations that show you broad principles of leadership and a couple of concrete pearls. So one of my first recommendations is you must read some book on negotiation. The first one I generally recommend is Getting to Yes. This is Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury. You will not get through your career as a sinologist without spending a lot of time negotiating. Negotiating with IT, negotiating with radiology, negotiating with cardiology. It just is the case that you will negotiate with people, your chair for resources of the medical school. Whatever your niche in ultrasound is, you will be negotiating. Getting to Yes is a great initial framework with some really key lessons, and I strongly recommend you guys read it or something similar. There's a lot in that book that is specific to negotiation, but there's one overriding lesson that I think transcends negotiation and is really a central organizing idea for how I think about the world. In a lot of our communication, we spend our time focused on our positions, not our principles or our needs. You will often find people start discussions in negotiations by saying that they have a solution or the solution to a problem. But these specific solutions almost never communicate to the other people you're talking to what's important to you, what's the need you're trying to fill, or what the principle of why we need to solve this problem and why the person across the table from you can agree that this is important and why you need these things. Related to that idea of principles, not positions, it's useful to help these processes along by first seeking to understand. This is one of those everything I need to learn, I learned in kindergarten pieces of advice that is so obvious in the abstract, but absolutely impossible when you're feeling passionate about something really important. When you want to be heard and understood, it is probably most important for you to pause and seek to understand first. And so here I will break for a brief story. Shortly after starting as ultrasound faculty, when we were having some early success, our colleagues in cardiology asked for a meeting to discuss the excess of point-of-care ultrasounds that was being performed in the emergency department. Now, we had that initial meeting with them, and there was a lot of accusations and concerns expressed and a lot of quotes about patient safety, but there was not actually concrete disclosure of studies they thought that we had done that they thought were inappropriate. The longer we spent talking about whether bedside echo was appropriate or not, the less progress we were going to make. And so instead of pushing back on their position that we were doing too many ultrasounds, I pivoted to spending time asking them about what their concerns were and what worry had specifically led to start the meeting if it was not a specific case. And then I spent most of the meeting being quiet. And believe me, being quiet, those who know me, is not easy for me. The longer I spent being quiet, the more our colleagues made clear that what they were most concerned about was decreasing reimbursement for the comprehensive ultrasounds after our point-of-care ultrasounds had been billed. Understanding that that was our real concern, it was a lot easier for me to just say, I'm happy to address this concern. We ran the numbers and reassured our colleagues that, in fact, the billing was not reduced after we did an ultrasound. But also, I was able to tell them that, hey, your billing numbers are maybe not what we should be dictating the practice of medicine on. When I say seek first to understand, that doesn't mean be silent. It doesn't mean give in or be a pushover, but it does mean seek to truly understand what the conversation you were really having is, not just have a conversation about the positions you enter the room with. So in addition to a book on negotiation, I would strongly recommend that everyone read at least one good book on communication skills. The one that I tend to recommend to people is Radical Candor. Radical Candor is in large part a book about recognizing where you are coming from when you communicate to others, and more importantly, when you miscommunicate with someone, how are you miscommunicating with others? When we are at our best, we can hopefully communicate with others from a place of both honesty and from caring. When you've received feedback from someone you value and you trust, that's usually where they're able to come from. Another small story, I remember a time that I had a struggling faculty member on my staff. They were feeling undervalued. They were also feeling that they were struggling to perform at the same level that some of my other faculty were, and they were right. Projects sent to them kind of languished, and the things that we needed to get done weren't really getting done. In that time in my leadership journey, I was not really comfortable having a really difficult conversation about this. I cared about the person. They were a friend and they were a colleague. And I cared personally for them, but I was unwilling to challenge them directly or be honest with them in our discussion. And that led me to this trap of ruinous empathy, where whenever I talked to them, I expressed my care, but I was rarely honest about my concerns. And for a long time, we were headed down kind of a dangerous road where my team was building resentment about this person not pulling their weight, and the person was building resentment about not feeling like they were able to go where they wanted to go in their career. And the thing I learned from that is probably I would have been better off having the honest conversation early while continuing to care about the person and have that be clear from my discussion than I was by being silent. In general, people often fall into this quadrant of ruinous empathy where we are afraid to speak honestly to people who we care about. It is also possible to have the other two problems, which, hopefully people don't fall into manipulative insincerity very often, but this problem of being very challenging and being very honest without being clear that you care about the person you're talking to is another trap that people fall into when communicating. And starting by understanding there's a body of knowledge and a body of work about how to communicate well, of which this is one of many books, is a helpful place to get better at your communication, which I promise you will be an important part of your job forever. I said that some of this would be broad principles, but some of this would be concrete pearls. I said that leadership is a body of knowledge. And the nice thing about having something that is a body of knowledge is that it is not completely different for every person. You shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. And so part of recognizing this body of knowledge is to recognize that we have a huge number of professional and advocacy organizations full of people who care about the same things you do. Very few challenges that you will face are challenges that no one has ever faced. Join these organizations, find your people, and use the resources they've already curated and created specifically for people like you. Obviously, you guys are already aware of the amazing resources P2 has put together, but there's also SCUF, the Academy of Emergency Ultrasound, the ACEP Ultrasound Section, AIUM, there's also AAEM, there's a number of organizations that I wasn't able to fit on this slide. Whatever organization most fits your style, recognize that your people will be found everywhere and you'll be able to get help from all of them the more that you engage with them. In addition to finding resources via our national organizations, I strongly recommend that locally, wherever you are, you try to find a couple of other people who you bond with and work with closely. I think it's important to recognize that institutions or corporations and companies, by and large, the institution doesn't love you back. And to the extent that most of us think about loving our institutions, usually this is shorthand for thinking about our relationships with the people that we care about at our institutions, our mentors, our mentees, our peers, and our colleagues. It is tremendously important that you establish a couple of these relationships very carefully. And in particular, I would say that everyone should have 2 mentors and a buddy. The 3 people I have on this slide are 3 people who have been absolutely instrumental in advancing my career. I want to pay special homage and honor to them. They've been an extremely important and positive part of my life. On the beginning of the slide, I have David Boehner, who is the expert at ultrasound, voice of the program at Ohio State University for many years, the person who trained me and sparked my passion for ultrasound, and who has been a lifelong mentor and resource for me, and been the person who's introduced me to most of these national organizations where I've had such a glorious and wonderful experience working with all of you. In the middle is Rob Wong. Many of you may know him as the former president of AEUS and the immediate past president of SCUF. He is the residency program director at University of Michigan and also a very close friend. And anytime I say I or discuss the things we accomplished at University of Michigan, usually they were things that were we and with his involvement and care as well. Having a partner in crime is so incredibly helpful. One is the loneliest number, and you don't want to be the only person caring about the things you care about. And finally, Maria Lozan, who is our current chief of staff, but also a previous division director for pediatric emergency care at Michigan Medicine, who has been another mentor for me, who's the person who taught me most of what I know about leadership today. Find 2 mentors and a buddy. These relationships with the people you care about will sustain you and will also grow you. So we've decided to lead on purpose. The next thing that I want you guys to focus on is the idea that you should lead with purpose. And here, the big thing to remember is that leadership isn't just putting one foot in front of the other or fighting the one fire immediately in front of you. It's understanding that to accomplish anything great that you want to accomplish, you have to decide where you're going to go, decide why that's the right place to go, and then convince others that it's the right place to go with you. And to lead with purpose, you need to really dig deep and understand what it is you care about and why it is you care about it. So a small story, I call this one the shoebox of broken dreams. I had just settled in as a new faculty and as an ultrasound director, and my head was full of thoughts of curricular revamp, of teaching residents, of working with our residency director on the fellowship. And I remember being very focused on the tasks immediately in front of me, especially education. And then one of my ultrasound senior residents brought me a shoebox filled with thermal prints of years of old scans done on the prior ultrasound director. And they said, I know that to receive my letter of competency, I need someone to QA these. Whatever education you want to deliver can only occur in the milieu that you create for it. I had been envisioning a world-class educational program, this castle in the sky of image review, of QA, QI, of work, of hands-on scanning and OSCEs and SDOTs. If your goal is to create a world-class educational program, you cannot build it on a foundation of a shoebox of thermal prints. the shoebox cannot be the foundation of your hopes and dreams. And the problem is that once you recognize this problem, you can't just dump out the shoebox and start over. There's more than one possible solution. You kind of have to decide which one and invest the time in finding a solution. And probably step one is decide what is it that you really want to accomplish and how do you get there. The shoebox of broken dreams really caused me to reevaluate what it was that I wanted to accomplish, how I wanted to spend my time in my career. And this leads me to another book recommendation: start with why. From the beginning of anything you take on, think really hard about the whys of the things you want to take on, and make sure that the whys really direct to what the solutions are. For me, the lesson of the shoebox was to help define my why. My job is to make sure that as many patients where I work and in the world can benefit from point of care ultrasound. And so my job is to tackle every problem that gets in the way of that happening. The key to many leadership problems is to understand that you need to find the shoebox and you need to address it. Things like the education will come, but first you have to address the shoebox of broken dreams. What's hard about that is that we're often at the ground level with this kind of work. We're really zoomed in on a specific solution or a specific problem. But before you commit days or hours or weeks to that kind of work, always zoom back out to think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. This is especially important when you are working with teams, because teams of people don't really understand what you want to do without you telling them, and they will not necessarily be able to independently execute the stuff you want them to execute. When you build your vision for this, you can think big. Don't just think about the last piece of the puzzle that you're working on today or the first piece of the puzzle that you want to work on tomorrow. Think about how today's projects build towards the things you want to accomplish in the long term. Rome wasn't built in a day, and you won't achieve your wildest dreams in day one. But you can absolutely and should absolutely set out these big, hairy, audacious goals and then solidify how the next project builds towards them. For me, the shoebox of broken dreams made me address that actually we didn't really have good ultrasound infrastructure. We needed to do that infrastructure work for us to be successful. This concept of thinking forward to the big, hairy, audacious goal comes from another book, Built to Last. I'm not going to linger on that very much, beyond to say that it is another book that is useful for thinking through how you want to build towards your long-term career goals. What is especially true when you have a big, hairy, audacious goal as you build up a program, there's always urgency to deal with the immediate task or the low-hanging fruit or the easy win. And often the urge is to neglect the infrastructure. The lesson for me was that the thankless iceberg of infrastructure you build is often what has to be there for you to build the work you want to be successful on. For us to fix the shoebox problem, we had to go back through all of our goals, ask where we had the most work to do, ask our residents, why is it that we need to have the shoebox? The answer was workflow. And so we spent a long time building our ultrasound workflow around making sure our images were easy for all physicians, not just in our department, but within the institution, to put images in a place that was visible to every other provider, visible in the chart, with notes kind of similar to radiology, in a standardized, easy way to work. And ideally, in a way that could be queued up for QA and for educational feedback. It was a tremendous amount of often thankless work for years. But after that infrastructure was put into place, so much more became possible. And so think hard about, should you tackle the low-hanging fruit, or should you think about building infrastructure that helps with the work you want to do? The problem that you will find once you start to define some of these big, hairy, audacious goals or these infrastructure projects that need to happen for you to be successful is you will be stretched very thin. And I promise you, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And the choice to do something world-class, to do something excellent, to do something the best in the world will come at the cost of choosing not to do some things that would be really fun or really cool. And no is an important choice. It is the choice that will often define your career. In fact, I recommend that you define your career a little bit more in the no's than in the yeses. Say yes to some things and have the yeses, and by virtue of the no's, an understanding of who you are, what matters to you, and what things define your career. The best advice my chair gave me kind of related to this is the idea that your career is like an hourglass. Early on, you do have to explore diverse interests, and you should. You should explore things early in your career. But over years, for you to be effective, you have to narrow it down to some neck of expertise where you have a unique contribution to the world that no one else has. That sounds lofty. It almost sounds arrogant, but the reality is that with time, effort, and mentorship, it is the case that you probably have a unique gift to bestow upon the world. And to bestow that gift, you must narrow the work that you do elsewhere. You have to turn down some other opportunities. After you have figured out what that unique thing you have to offer is, often it is possible for you to zoom back out and leverage the work that you do into doing work in other areas. My favorite example of this is probably Rob Wong, who started out as generically an ultrasound person, did work with education, with administration, with research, became an ultrasound education person, and then within ultrasound and education has kind of become a med ed theorist expert within leveraging and working on and raising the bar of what is possible in ultrasound education. And now he's broadened that med ed theory approach that he's taken to ultrasound back to the broader emergency medicine education community. Oftentimes, almost all of you in this audience have a similar set of things that you're interested in that you could cone down and hone to an area of excellence. So I've said lead on purpose, and I've said lead with purpose. And I worry that the takeaway people can get from all of that could be that everything has to be planned out. And if you didn't plan out your career from day one, all is lost. And that's not at all true. In fact, I would go a step further and I would say that plans are worthless, but planning is everything. You have to plan the things you want to do. You have to have an area and a direction you're moving. You have to have some understanding of what goals you want to achieve. But you should also expect that whatever plans you have made, those are not the things that are actually going to happen. Everyone has a plan until it makes contact with the real world, and all of those plans won't actually happen. But the act of planning clarifies what you can do, clarifies what you want to do, clarifies what you need to learn to accomplish the things you want to do. Plans are worthless, but planning itself is everything. And that is, I hope, the broader lesson. Lead on purpose and lead with purpose are things about giving you the tools to achieve your goals, but not to set a single path that is the only way you can achieve your goals. And part of the reason that it is important to set a direction is to recognize that you will not follow a linear path to that set of goals being achieved. Part of that is that really some of what we do is going to come down to luck. But luck is really where the opportunity in front of you happens to meet the preparations you've made. And so most of what this is a discussion of what are the preparations you've made and how do you make them. And here I will end with one last story. The goal that I had been hoping to build my career to, my Rome, my big, hairy, audacious goal, was to build to a position for system-wide clinical ultrasound director at University of Michigan. There was a need for it. I had written up numerous proposals for it. We had made a lot of progress in our department goals, and our department's ultrasound program is still kind of the de facto version of what is rolled out for point-of-care ultrasound in other departments. I had done institutional ultrasound work, and I had been working with hospital leadership for years via the position I had held on the credentialing committee. Whenever my proposal for system-wide clinical ultrasound director came up, I never and still have not had success getting it funded. As I was getting this, I was getting a lot of feedback of, hey, this is interesting, but no. But they also came to me and said, we don't really like this, but we do like you. And so in the process of getting yet another no for what I really wanted to accomplish, that put me in the conversation for the role I now hold as Associate Chief of Staff. And because I want to point out that this is about the preparation, the communication, and the relationships you have. The person who suggested me for the job that is now my current leadership role was actually one of the radiologists who I'd worked closely with and had a lot of conflict with earlier in my career. The time that you put into the work matters, but it won't always take you where you thought you wanted to go. And when you go there, it won't always be by the linear path you hope to get there. I still hope that someday we will launch a system-wide clinical ultrasound program at University of Michigan. I just know that now I'm trying to set that up for someone else to achieve that leadership goal. I want to come back to our core point here at the end, which is that as you engage with your leadership journey, you may not agree or love every piece of advice that I've offered here today, and that's okay. As long as you seize the destiny, seize the day as leaders within our ultrasound community, for you guys to be the leaders of not just ultrasound, not just pediatric emergency ultrasound, but rather pediatric emergency medicine, and global health of the future. I wish you way more than luck, and I expect you all to have a great conference. Thank you all, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Nick. That was great. For the audience, if you guys could, if you have questions for Nick, just type them in the Q&A and Nick will be able to see them and read the questions. Nick, I'll just say that was fantastic. But I would say in addition to leadership lessons, these are really life lessons. They're very, really important points.
I mean, it is the case that leadership is just everything you needed to learn in kindergarten, just apply it.
Yeah.
While we're waiting for questions, one thing I will say to the group just as a whole is that it's not directly part of the leadership talk, but it is a thing I genuinely believe. I think we're in a time where emergency medicine, pediatric emergency medicine, we're in a time of like terrible boarding and systematic problems within our healthcare systems. Some might say the collapse of our healthcare systems. That is obviously a set of problems, but it is also an opportunity for all of us to take advantage of and say, and we will be the ones to help fix this. And so, I really truly believe that the things that bring us joy in our work is some ability to express agency and autonomy in our work, some expression of competency. We want to be good at the thing that we do, and some sense of connectedness, the ability to be part of a broader community. Obviously, our national organizations are part of that connectedness, but all three of these things are things that we hope to engage with as leaders. And so I hope that you guys take the agency piece of that as a piece that you can take away from this.
Nick, maybe can you address, especially for the younger group, the issue of, I think it's a critical point, the issue of no. But it's not always very easy to get to know.
Yeah.
I'm
not going to lie to you. Part of my problem right now is that I'm stretched too thin because I've said yes to too many things. So, I don't want to pretend that even understanding the idea of getting to know sometimes gets you there in practice. I think that part of what makes no hard is you feel an obligation to the people you work with. But your obligation to those people, especially your mentors, is to be able to be successful. And then your obligation to yourself is to be able to be happy. And capital S success and capital H happiness are not necessarily particularly correlated. Right. And so when you say no, you have to be able to say, like, this is part of what I need to be able to be happy is I need to not be doing this, or I need to not have all of these things. But also, especially when you need to justify your no's to the bosses, you need to be able to say, this is what I would need to be successful with this ask. And I don't think that that's possible at this time. And often the answer to that, why the no is, here's the other things that I need to be successful on right now. And within these priorities, I don't see a way for me to add this to the plate without one of these other things suffering. Usually those no's should be couched in terms of principles, right? Which is, I and you both agree this thing needs to happen, and here's why I think that I couldn't do it right now. But often those no's need to be couched not in a specific positional argument, but rather and how do we get this thing to happen without it being me that does it?
Okay. I think there's one question in the Q&A, Nick. Go ahead.
Oh, great. I'm sorry. Where is the question? I don't see it.
Let me read it. One of the attendees is asking, so are you still negotiating?
Oh, yes.
To get that ultrasound position funded from your current position?
Yes, I am. And now I have a regular meeting with the CMO. So I'm in a little bit of a better position to make it happen in the long run. Probably won't happen this year. But that's one of the benefits of being in leadership, is often it just gets you a seat at the table. So I didn't get that specific leadership position created. And in large part, the reason that I said it as and I will probably make this position for someone else, is now that position would not be a promotion.
Okay. Do you see the Q&A from?
Yes, I do. Yeah, Melissa, I think that part of it comes down to discussing with what part of leadership, what you need to be successful doing the thing you want to do. And Nick, so
you repeat just.
Sorry, let me repeat the question. My institution seems excited about point of care ultrasound and really leans on EM for educating our learners from PEDS to EM to APPs and the medical students. The POCUS division's goal is to keep POCUS learning small and hands-on, but it is hard to find that time with all the tasks and leadership asked to add more and more learners. What is your advice for communicating to leadership that POCUS learning is different than other types of didactic learning? Well, I think that I actually would say that there's a couple ways to approach that problem. I will tell you how we approached it. We told our department that hands-on ultrasound training is actually not just learning. We said that this is a clinical hour. So I have ultrasound shifts in our department roughly 5 days a week, 4 to 5 days a week for 4 hours a day that are covered by the department as clinical hours. And we staff those shifts with learners, and we staff them up to their capacity. And then when leadership asks for more learners on those clinical hours, I tell them, when you go to the EM shifts, you'll note that we have a cap on how many learners can be on each of these shifts. An hour for clinical hour, we are covering more learners with our point of care ultrasound shifts. And so I think that shift in mental model makes it a little bit easier for leadership to acknowledge the work that you do on these hands-on ultrasound shifts is clinical work. It's not just teaching at the bedside. It's not classroom learning where you can have 25 or 30 learners. It's bedside teaching in the clinical environment, and it is part of your clinical effort and work. And you would never ask the EM attending on your resuscitation shift to cover 25, 30, 45 learners in a 4-hour period of time. And so by shifting our leadership mental model and approach to these shifts as being clinical time, that has helped us in a couple ways. One, I'm trying to negotiate with the hospital to cover the cost of that clinical time. But two, on our department's books, those are clinical hours, and then they're staffed with learners the way other clinical hours would be staffed. Yeah, but I would say there's lots of other approaches. We just took the principles in discussion with our leadership of why is it that you think these things can happen with 50 people or 80 people or more and more people. And we were able to walk it back and say, well, listen, when I'm here, it's not different than how else I'm in the department. And so, we listened and then we talked. Dr. Ching says, thank you for this talk. Maybe this is a big topic of a whole other talk, but what are some of the first steps that you recommend in helping define the thing that makes you unique? Oh man, this is like a 2-hour to 6-hour workshop, and then also the work of a lifetime. But I think to make it very brief, the answer is you got to introspect. I think that we are often so like, well, this is the job that has to be done, that it's difficult to think through, well, what is it that I can do that no one else can do? I really thought that what I wanted to do was mostly teach. When I saw the problems in front of us and the work that I could do and that my colleagues could do, I realized that my EM superpower is attending meetings. And that was a harsh realization for me, but also one that made it a lot easier for me to come to terms with what I could give that other people couldn't.
Okay, great. If there are no further questions, Nick, thank you for a superb talk. And we really appreciate you being here and being our keynote speaker today.
Thank you all for the opportunity. I'm going to throw my email in the chat in case people had questions they didn't want to ask out loud. And I'm always happy to talk. Thank you, guys. I wish you way more than luck and good luck.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.